for purpose of markup, I now call up H.R. 4314, the Counterterrorism Screening and Assistance Act. Without objection, it is considered read, and it's open for amendment at any point. And also without objection, as members were notified yesterday, we're going to consider this item en bloc with Royce Amendment 92, a manager's amendment that was provided to your offices, and that amendment is in your packets. I now recognize myself to speak. So I'd like to begin by thanking Mr. Zeldin for his work on this legislation. This is the Counterterrorism Screening and Assistance Act. And last year, the horrific terrorist attack in Paris, I think, showed us how easy it has become for terrorists and for foreign fighters to move across open borders. This important legislation makes several important changes. It requires the Department of State and Homeland Security to produce an annual scorecard. And that scorecard would assess the border security efforts of countries around the world. This will identify weaknesses and areas for improvement abroad, and it will streamline our own efforts to assist partners overseas with border security programs. The administration will then submit a plan to Congress for prioritizing U.S. assistance. The bill also requires the establishment of minimum standards for border security. Countries that fail to meet these minimum standards can have U.S. foreign assistance suspended, employing the same incentive already in place for trafficking and for human rights violations. This bill reflects the recommendations made by our colleagues on the Committee on Homeland Security's bipartisan Task Force on Combating Terrorist and Foreign Fighter Travel, which we have worked together on, by the way. And I again thank Mr. Zeldin for his leadership on this critical issue and recognize Homeland Security Chairman Mike McCall for his efforts on this legislation as well. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Elliott Engel, for his remarks on this legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to all the members of our committee. I'm happy the committee is getting back to work, and I'm happy to support our first measure today, Mr. Zeldin's bill, the Counterterrorism Screening and Assistance Act. The United States and our partners need to do whatever we can to stop terrorists and foreign fighters from traveling across borders. Here at home, this bill would ramp up coordination among relevant government agencies. Around the world, it would help our partners by speeding up the transfer of the software and technology we use to track international travel, to collect biometric data, and to assess the risk individuals might pose. And this bill would put a particular focus on the countries where the danger of terrorists and foreign fighters is most acute. Bill is certainly a step in the right direction. I thank Mr. Zeldin for his hard work. I will support the measure, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lee Zeldin.
Thank you, Chairman. Today I'm asking for everyone's support of the Counterterrorism Screening and Assistance Act of 2016. First off, I would like to thank our committee chairman, Ed Royce, and his amazing staff here at the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Their incredible leadership and assistance on this issue and so many others do so much every day to keep Americans safe. I also wish to thank Chairman McCall, who sits on this committee and serves as the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, for his efforts on this very important issue as well. I also thank the ranking member, Elliott Engel, for his support of this effort. The Counterterrorism Screening and Assistance Act of 2016 is so important for resolving the vulnerabilities that currently exist with international security abroad, which pose a concerning threat to our homeland. The horrific terror attacks in Paris, France, that killed over 100 people were largely carried out by European nationals, many of whom traveled to train and fight in Syria and then later returned to Europe through Greece and Turkey. Although local authorities already knew some of the attackers, they were still able to move across borders without detection and in some cases used fraudulent passports. With the rise of terrorism in the U.S. and around the world, and with the high number of foreign fighters returning from ISIS strongholds in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere, There is a very serious and well-recognized need for improved border security and information sharing between governments. It's essential that the United States work together with the global community to monitor and stop the movement of terrorists abroad. The Counterterrorism Screening and Assistance Act of 2016 would establish a plan to close security gaps that currently exist that allow terrorists and foreign fighters to travel internationally. The plan would establish international border security standards that would be developed in coordination with all relevant U.S. government departments and agencies, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense, Attorney General, Director of National Intelligence, and Director of the FBI. Under the plan, U.S. resources would be utilized in the most efficient way possible, with a special focus on high-risk and medium-risk countries. Under this legislation, a reporting system would also be established to monitor efforts of foreign governments to combat terrorism and foreign fighter travel, and to suspend foreign assistance to countries not making significant efforts to comply. Furthermore, the legislation would put a monitoring system in place that would screen for infectious diseases to contain and prevent any potential outbreaks. This is a measure that is long overdue, and I'm proud to help lead the effort in the House. I strongly encourage my colleagues in Congress to join in this effort to address a serious national security threat and vote today to pass the Counterterrorism Screening and Assistance Act of 2016 to keep Americans safe. Thank you again, Chairman, for your leadership, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Zeldin. Any other members seek recognition? Mr. McCall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for your hard work on this bill and the ranking member. And, of course, this came out of our counterterrorism task force, spearheaded by the majority leader. And I think it was a great sort of concert of work between the Homeland Security Committee and this Committee on Foreign Affairs. This holiday season provided, I think, further evidence of the high terror threat environment. This become a new norm. Just last week, authorities in the United States and Europe disrupted multiple ISIS plots aimed at innocent civilians celebrating the new year. Good intelligence, cooperation, and law enforcement vigilance helped prevent these potential massacres. But our enemies are still dead set on conducting external operations against us, and they're more capable than ever of doing so. ISIS has now inspired or directed nearly 70 terrorist plots or attacks against Western countries, and as we saw in the streets of Paris, they're deploying some of their 30,000 foreign fighters to carry out operations across the world. As we all now know, it is too easy for these extremists to get to and from terrorist hotspots undetected. Indeed, the mastermind of the Paris attacks bragged in ISIS online magazine, and I quote, "I was able to leave and come despite being chased after by so many intelligence services." As chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee last year, I launched a bipartisan task force on combating terrorist and foreign fighter travel to examine this threat. The panel conducted the widest review on this subject since the 9/11 Commission. They uncovered shocking security gaps, especially overseas. For instance, many countries lack effective counterterrorism vetting systems. They fail to screen travelers against key law enforcement databases or do little to stop passport fraud. Make no mistake, these weaknesses overseas put us in danger here at home. Our task force issued more than 50 recommendations to close security loopholes, and this legislation today by Mr. Zeldin implements several of them. It will help our allies put in place effective counterterrorism tools to more quickly ramp up screening of foreign travelers. It will also reduce U.S. government waste, overlap, and duplication. For example, the bill requires agencies for the first time ever to coordinate and streamline their numerous assistance programs and to focus resources on the highest risk countries. I want to commend John Katko, who led the task force on combating terrorism for foreign fighters, and then also Mr. Zeldin from New York for his hard work on this bill. I'd like to thank this committee also, again, for their close collaboration with my committee. We have a lot more work to do, but I believe this is a very important step in keeping terrorists and foreign fighters from getting into the United States and from threatening Americans. And with that, I yield back.